Ladies and gentlemen, in a pilot presentation brought to you live from the Republican headquarters in Silverdale, Washington, welcome, streaming on Facebook Live and YouTube, The Patriot Show. Brought to you by Almost Candid Photography in Kingston, Washington, the Puget Sound Patriots, and the Kitsap County Republican Party, featuring Johnny Walker and his special guests, Representative Jesse Young of the 26th District, Kitsap County Chair Juliana McMahon, hazardous liberty activist Tyler Miller, and We the Govern's very own Glenn Morgan. It's time now to press on for the fight for liberty, the honorable and the loyal opposition to tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time now. Here's Johnny. Hi everybody, I'm Johnny Walker and welcome to the first pilot episode of Patriot Live. You know, one of the most important messages and learning points of 2020 is that preaching to the choir is not enough. 20% will never win against 51%. So Republicans and conservatives need to start with new educational strategy in order to attract moderates, moderate Democrats, independents, libertarians, and other groups in order to increase the size of our slice of the pie. So we hope you enjoy this message today and that you will support it financially. We'll show you a slide at the end of the show on how to do that. Until then, for fun and a little movie nostalgia, remember that my name is Johnny Walker, and if you are listening to this message, you are the resistance. Let's start first with a video from our sponsor. I'm Johnny, and welcome back to Patriot Live. Is our first guest a perfect family man, a top conservative statesman, a mouse standing in front of the eagle, or he is a socialist's worst nightmare? Let's introduce Representative Jesse Young from Gig Harbor. Jesse, it's good to see you today.
Johnny, it's good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
No, I wouldn't have anybody else here on our first episode, so I'm proud to have you as my friend. And actually, I've said many times that, you know, I live in the 23rd, but you probably represent us more effectively in the 26th than our actual electeds do. So thank you for that.
You're not the only one that said that. Yeah, I feel like I've been adopted into the 23rd. Thank you.
You have been. So, you know, you've always been a strong supporter of the Puget Sound Patriots, and actually a key supporter of the Olympic Conference that we started a few years ago, the idea of bringing people together in order to have a broader conservative message. But we're going into January. On the 11th, you've got a message that you want to get out. Let's talk about taxes real quick.
Sure.
Go ahead, give me the spiel. Where are we going to focus on with taxes?
Well, I think that there's a throw mud against the wall and see what sticks plan that's being put out into the media by the Democrat Party, but I think behind the scenes there are very few strategic taxes that they want to do. I think what you've seen with the governor and his extensions, what he's attempted to do is create a scenario to justify some form of tax increase. I believe he feels he has a mandate, and you're going to see some form of carbon push from the governor. I believe that he has national aspirations again, and so he wants to, kind of bolster up his bona fides on that. He's going to push for that. The talk of a revenue package from transportation, which would include a gas tax or some form of road user charge, is being discussed. But then you also have the main one that the Democrat caucuses want, which is a capital gains income tax. And I think you're going to see a major push around that, with the narrative being that, well, we need this revenue. We need to tax the rich on these few areas and just target these folks, which we know they won't stick to or uphold, so that they could justify giving more money into healthcare to try to get us over the COVID hump. I think those are going to be the main thrusts that you'll see start to come out of Olympia in short order. And everything else that they're talking about is probably going to fall by the wayside.
Well, how do you get around the idea that the courts, the IRS, talk about many of these taxes being clearly income taxes and unconstitutional in the state?
Well, it's a tough one to get around, because if I know you know this, not a lot of people. Well, it's a tough one to get around. Capital gains tax has been tried and passed by the state legislature. The capital gains tax has been tried and passed by the state legislature twice before in state history. And both times it's been taken to the Supreme Court and ruled that it's using tax and using it. It doesn't matter if they want to call it some other label, whether it's some form of excise tax, or whether it's some type of payroll tax, or whether it's some other named tax. Every time it's failed. I believe that they don't care about precedent now. I believe that they feel as though they've got a friendly Supreme Court in the state, and so they want to try it again. Since I've been in office, since 2014, the turnover in the Democrat Party has been pretty steep, and it has moved the party progressively to the left, especially with new, AOC-style members coming out of Seattle. And so they want to take their whack at it, and they believe that if they run that through and pass it, it will be challenged in court. They just believe the court will side with them this time, and regardless of any type of precedent.
Isn't this just disrespect to the voters' wishes?
Well, that depends on who you ask. I mean, a lot of these people coming out of Seattle are winning at a 70 or 80% clip. I understand why they're doing it. I don't agree with it. Obviously, you don't. But if you ask voters in Seattle, they believe lockstep that if you tax more of these rich people, that somehow that won't have any negative consequence at all to the economy or to other citizens. And it will only bring more money so that they can have that final extra dollar that they always believe that if it comes will solve their problems, even though when they do get it, it never does. But yeah, to the rest of the voters of the state, it certainly is a disregard. The state has been consistent. As a whole, the state has said consistently, we do not want these taxes, period.
Well, the state has been spending lots of unplanned money on COVID mitigations. So new taxes on top of old taxes and a failing economy. I mean, hundreds, perhaps thousands of businesses have gone home in Washington state. How do you rationalize increasing taxes with the economy and businesses struggling so much?
Well, that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm glad that you're an advocate the way that you are, and anybody that's watching, I'm glad that you're paying attention. The average person just needs a little bit of conversation on this topic to get beyond the 101 level hyperbole, because the Democrats are continuing to push the narrative that additional tax isn't going to affect the common person. It's not going to have an economic impact. It's just going to this is going to be taxes on people like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or some other really rich person like that. But make no mistake, we have shown conclusively that when they do these types of taxes, it is the lower income, vulnerable demographics that do get hurt, because jobs leave the state, they don't open up, businesses close. And when that happens, real people are hurt in real ways. And then after a year or two, the economic revenue that we were supposed to get from it never appears. And then there's a more dangerous gambit here. Typically what they try to do when they increase these taxes now is because they know themselves that these tax increases will hurt the economy. It will hurt the average person. What you've seen more and more in the past decade or two is they'll pass the tax and then they'll immediately come over the top of it with a bond, and they'll borrow off of the future revenue before we know whether or not that revenue will actually materialize. And then we're obligated constitutionally to pay back that debt, so we have to keep the taxes on. It's a death spiral that goes down and down and down and ends up leaving single parent mothers fending to try to put food on the table for their kids, or fixed income seniors trying to afford their medication.
And there's so many people living in fear today
Yeah.
that it's almost like they're just giving the governor carte blanche. Just save my life because I'm going to die of a COVID virus. And this seems like the Republicans, the established Republican caucus, hasn't really been advocating very strongly against that.
Well, yeah, there's certainly a measure of, on the Republican side, of how hard to push back, how hard to stand strong against it. I generally tend to align myself more with the strategy that says we need to be more assertive in our approach. And I think a lot of people in the population are becoming agitated because they don't see enough assertion from the Republican Party. I'm not advocating that we get out there and be disrespectful or unprofessional, but I think people aren't necessarily asking for that yet. What they're asking is, will you at least just stand up? And when the overall strategy that seems to come out from established conservative base is, well, let's just kind of meekly stand up and hope that they make a mistake that we can capitalize on. Well, that could potentially be a strategy that works, but it's a longer term strategy. And a longer term strategy like that employed in an environment of COVID, where real people are losing their jobs, where real people are dying because of deaths of despair. When in our history have we ever had a measurable called that? There's now a phrase, deaths of despair, from people that are committing suicide because they can't provide for their family, because their business went under, they can't figure out how to make it. When you see that measure start to rise up, I think that shows it crystallizes what some of us fear is the negative consequence of standing by and waiting for the left to make a mistake.
And I would just mention that it's not just deaths of despair, but also deaths that will result in the future, shortening the lives of those people who are unable to get preventive care, who are unable to feed themselves as they may have in the past, and simply not taking care of themselves well enough. And so we're trading again, as if I may say, and I'm happy to hear if you disagree, where Democrats specialize in taking something from one side and giving it to the other. Aren't we really just taking away the quality and length of life from one group of non-essentials to give life to those the government thinks are more essential?
Johnny, that's why I'm a Republican now. I mean, anybody that's ever followed me knows that I came out, I graduated from school, I came up impoverished, hating Ronald Reagan, because I was taught as a low-income kid that he was the reason why I was poor, because he kept taking money from poor people and giving it to the rich. All of a sudden, here I am growing up in these low demographic neighborhoods in Hilltop, Tacoma, and long story short, I go away, I get a good grade, a good degree, I get a good job, I come out, I'm no longer impoverished, and I move back to the area, and all of my poor friends are still poor. And over the course of that 20 years, the Democrat policies had been completely put in place over Tacoma. There was no Republican challenge to them. And after all of those years, I came back and there was no result. And that's exactly what you're speaking to. The notion that they're playing to, well, we want to help you, but where are the results? When people actually stop listening to the hyperbole and look at the results, they never produce them. They say, well, just $1 more, $1 more, $1 spent a little bit differently. They never ask the questions about what do we do to lower the cost, see if we can streamline government, make it smaller and get a better result. They don't talk about that. They keep asking for more money, and that was the paramount thing that I saw as an adult, as a family man coming back, wanting to provide for my kids now. I wanted to make sure that they never taste homelessness like I did. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and said, these Democrat policies, they've had decades to make it work with no challenge. We are the longest running state in the country that has not had a Republican leader in government. It's been 40 years plus. And they've had their way completely throughout that time frame. And we still have rising homelessness, rising healthcare problems. And they just haven't solved the problem, but they sure have taxed us a lot more.
And we're getting ready to go into a new legislative season that the appearances are that the majority party, the Democrats, are going to kind of orchestrate things their way. Give us your quick thoughts on the remote legislative session.
Well, that's very easy. I do not support a remote legislative session at all. It's not constitutional, first off. Here we are. If you're looking at me, you can see me on camera. You know what you can't see while I'm talking to you? I can get up and I can deliver an effective speech. I can look over to you, Johnny, and I can say things very resolutely. I can say them passionately if you want to know how passionately I care. What you cannot see right now is who's standing behind the camera. You can't tell who's potentially cueing me. Is there somebody cueing me? Is there not? Am I reading from a card? Am I not? Am I that good of an actor? Am I not? And when you go to a remote session where you're using technology like this, I ask you a very simple question. How can you guarantee that there's not some lobbyist standing behind that camera holding a checkup in one hand and a script in this hand, telling me or buying my vote or asking me or paying me to say something that they want on a record?
So what's the mitigation? As we move forward into the year, the governor has said this, the majority leader has said that. They're going to start out remote. What is the acceptable mitigation for Republicans and conservatives?
Well, there's going to be a lot of chaos in this environment. If I had the ability to prognosticate it, I could probably make a lot of money off of it in Vegas by betting. But the truth is, I think that the tack that I would take would be to force the issue that we need to be there and then work with the other side to mitigate any health risks. If we can go into Costco, if we can go into Walmart, and we've been doing it for the whole year, then we can figure out a way for us to be in Olympia, voting transparently in front of people and still maintaining health protocols. If masks work, fine. I'll go to the Capitol. I can get on board with, choosing by myself to wear a mask. I can choose to sit a little bit further away. I'll tell you what, Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins, I'll sit up in the balcony if you need to create more space on the floor, but get us back down to the Capitol. Get us voting transparently so that the people can see and trust the product of what we're providing for them. I think the end result is going to be that they're not going to take me up on my offer. I think that unless the technology literally just completely fails us, in other words, someone in Spokane, someone on the eastern side of the state completely just can't get on, they keep cutting out. I have major technological concerns with this. We already have bandwidth issues with regard to people trying to remote in to a session. And if we're in the middle of a vote and someone jumps off or someone gets taken down because their internet goes down and we can't record their vote, is it a legal vote? But more importantly, I haven't seen any jurisprudence come out as a technology professional. I'm a software engineer in my real job. I've seen no discussions about what are they going to do to make sure that we're not hackable. Are we VPNing in? Well, we have bandwidth issues. If you start to try to create a VPN pipe, you're sucking up more bandwidth for people that hardly can connect right now. These are all types of technical issues. I think that we're going to have a lot of chaos in that regard. And that might force the hand to say that we got to come back down. The truth is we've had months to figure this out. I've not received one call as a technology professional to ask my advice on how can we solve this problem so that we can actually be there, take any constitutional considerations or concerns off the table, and let's just get our job done there. We were elected. Everybody that ran this year had to file this year fully knowing that COVID was already upon us. And so they chose to file and run for office knowing that our job was to be done in Olympia. And now they're kind of changing the rules. I think that's a major problem. And I think what will happen is if they do everything they can to maintain that type of session, whether it is to just get some budgets passed, get them passed really quick and then close us down again and continue to give the governor his carte blanche, how are we supposed to really protest as legislators, use parliamentary procedure to try to force the issue so that we can have discussions about reining in the governor's problems? All of that is completely given a free pass to the Democrats if we don't do it. And what I think they'll do is they'll close session down, they'll try to get out of Dodge, and then people are going to start suing. They're going to claim, are the votes legal? Were they not? And then it's just going to be a mess.
A morass. And we could probably talk about this for another complete hour. But we want to get to one more thing before we finish this segment.
Okay.
And if it's your way, as I understand it, you're not long for the House. You're on your way to somewhere. You've already announced, but you haven't announced here. Tell us what's going on.
Well, so we at one point in time in the 26th legislative district, which goes from the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Gig Harbor all the way up to Bremerton and the Warren Avenue Bridge. We used to have it completely red. The Senate spot and the two House seats were all Republican. And unfortunately, in 2018, we lost that Senate spot. So I've decided to file and run for Senate to reclaim that spot and try to get us back into the majority in the Senate so that we actually have a gavel and we actually have a seat at the table that we can try to enforce reason and professionalism back into the legislative process. So I announced for that. The support has been tremendous. I've raised more money in the 3 weeks before we ended up going into a fundraising freeze because our state laws dictate that 30 days before a session you can't raise money anymore until you're done the session. And we raised more money in that 3 weeks than I raised in a year and a half in my last campaign. And so there's a lot of strong support to see us take that seat back. So I'll be running for the Senate.
Well, we're very excited for you. We'll talk soon again about what's in store for the House, because there will be concerns about losing your voice there. Excited about the Senate. And so thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate our joining on the first episode. And as we look at our next guest coming up, she's sweet as apple pie, Maddie from True Grit, or Sarah Connor, all grown up. Up next, you'll decide. Okay, welcome back. And I just want to, thank the Kitsap County Republican Party for hosting us today on our first episode. And, thank you, Juliana. It's great. You know what? I've heard that you've been part of the Republican Party since Jack Hamilton was polishing his ensign bars. Is that true?
I don't think so. I mean, Jack's been around for a long time. I really think that I was probably quite small when he was polishing his ensign bars.
Yeah. So give us your journey real quick. How did you end up becoming the leader of the Kitsap County Republican Party?
Well, it was a lot of encouragement. I absolutely would not be here without all of the wonderful people at the Kitsap County Republican Party. I started when I was very young, working for, people like Jesse Young and helping their election, except back then it was Bob Oak and Bob Williams. And so that gives you an idea of how old I am. And so that was really great, good experience. And then I served as state committeewoman for 8 years and then went on to become the secretary. And I've been serving as that most of the time since then. And so I really understand what's going on in the Republican Party. I've done a lot of research and thinking about how we could win more elections. I had a lot of people encourage me and say that I was just the right person for this time to help bring the Republican Party together so we can work together to elect Republicans, because we really have more in common than we have differences.
I'm glad you said that, because the difference between gatekeeping on core principles and the platform and building collaborative relationships, they don't have to be exclusive, do they?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. We can still have principal candidates, and we can also recognize that, as you were talking about earlier, if we just have that 20% slice of the pie who agree 100% with us on everything, we say, okay, this is the only thing we're going to do is just take this 20%. We're never going to win elections. Let's be honest. We have to reach out to the people that agree with us on most issues. And as a matter of fact, tons of research has shown that the Democrats are losing their moral high ground, and they are losing their principles. And the people that are voting for them don't even agree with them. They just don't know that they're doing that.
So what would be the steps that the Republican Party would take and change with all the energy of 2020? what would be the change for next year? Have you got anything planned out yet?
Absolutely. So I think that we have to do two things. First of all, we need to do a little housekeeping. We need to learn how to work together, because you can work with people that you disagree with, believe it or not. You can even work with people that you don't like. So we need to learn how to work together. And there's a lot of skill sets that we can learn to do that. And then the second thing is we need to elect Republicans. We know what we need to do. We know that you have to get the 50% plus one in order to win elections. I mean, technically it's a majority, I should say. And we need to get our people elected. And the way we do that is by helping the voters to understand why our candidates are better for their life than the Democrats are, which clearly, as Jesse mentioned a few minutes ago, Republicans absolutely are better for them than the Democrats are.
Well, then when it comes down to it, maybe the argument is what's a good candidate versus supporting a bad candidate?
So good candidate versus candidate. That's a really not just a straightforward answer. There's so many different things involved in being a candidate. I think probably the key thing to a good candidate is somebody who's willing to learn, somebody who's willing to work hard, and somebody who understands that we can't keep doing things the way we've always done it and expect to have a different result.
Well, and that's the perfect close. You know, Juliana, again, I want to express our great appreciation for Kitsap County Republican Party hosting our first episode, and I hope you'll continue to host us in the future.
Absolutely, Johnny. Thank you so much for coming out today. It's great. You guys are doing a wonderful job, and we appreciate you.
Well, and our next guest, after a short break, is this gentleman a layman lawyer, a highwayman, or just Johnny Cash without the guitar? Up next, you'll decide.
Okay. Cue me before you cue me. Okay. It's not going.
Hello, this is Johnny, and we're back again with our first episode of Patriot Live, and our next guest, Tyler Miller, activist, Liberty at All Hazards, or Hazardous Liberty. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you, Johnny. Thanks for having me.
No, you know, this is very timely because I think you have an important event coming up on the 11th, don't you?
I do. I have on the 11th, we are calling it Legislative Lockout. It is to protest, as Jesse was saying earlier, the remote session, unconstitutional remote session that the legislature is planning on having for the 2021 session. We are planning to be there 24 hours a day for as long as it takes for the legislature to revise their plans and allow the public to participate and view the process as they're constitutionally entitled to.
And so, how many people do you expect to show?
Oh, that's always a fun guessing game. If you go by our Facebook event page, I think a little over 100 people have said that they're definitely going to show up. I know that a lot of people have contacted me and said that they're purposefully not saying that they're going to show up because of employment issues or friends. They don't want to out themselves in that way. But if it's anything like our events last spring, I would say probably somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000.
Well, that'll be a substantial number. But, you know, one of the reasons why I asked you to be here today is because this, what I'll call an advocacy journalist, because I don't see any objectivity in the article, an advocacy journalist named Brandon Block for the Olympian. He wrote a news story recently says militia group. Militia group plans to occupy the legislative building in Olympia when the session begins. Is that you? Are you a militia group, and are you going to go militarily occupy the Capitol?
I am not a militia group. However, if you were to look at, I believe it's Georgetown Law has put together a flyer that they're circulating around to legislators and out there trying to get people, individuals like me, actually designated as militia groups for the purpose of passing legislation that would disallow us these types of protests. No, actually an article came out today in the Times, the Seattle Times, that actually gets it much more accurate. We are there to conduct a peaceful protest of this unconstitutional process. Now, we have support from a various number of groups. Washington 3% is one of those groups that is going to show up and help with provide security and provide just some advice and consent kind of aspect to crowd control, because it's something that they excel at. But no, this is me basically just saying, hey, I'm going to be down at the legislative building. Who wants to join me?
And so, concisely, what's your message, and how can people learn about this event to get more people out?
So the event is very simple, has a very straightforward objective goal. The legislature needs to restore in-person access for the public at both floor sessions and in committee hearings. That's where the bulk of the development of legislation happens, is in those committee hearings. Having people in person testify is a key component. You cannot virtually replace presence. Being in a room, having the support of people in a room when you are talking about a piece of legislation, it bears weight that cannot be replicated. Just as Jesse was saying earlier, you don't know who's behind the camera right now. I've got no presence, no connection with the people who are watching us other than me. And even if I were to put 50 people behind me, it would still have that disconnect watching through a screen. So the simple message is, we must have public access as the Constitution requires. And if people want to learn more about what we're doing, they can go to hazardousliberty.com. We've got an events tab there that you can read all about what we're doing and why. And I hope to see you there and join our effort.
So, hazardous liberty. Let's talk about real quick what that means. And so, I just kind of jumped the shark, and I'm not going to actually jump over a cliff if I can walk down the stairs, right?
Absolutely.
So tell us what that really means, hazardous liberty.
So that comes from a 1765 quote from John Adams, which unfortunately I have not committed the entire quote to memory, but the essential aspect of it is that liberty must be defended against and under all hazards. You must put yourself to any risk necessary in order to fight for and preserve liberty. That there is no caveat, no excuse, no pandemic can come in and say, well, in this situation, you can't be free. You have to put yourself to the risk, to the hazard, not every opportunity, but if necessary, to preserve liberty.
Okay, so the if necessary is really the key.
Is the key.
And individuals are the ones who actually define that level of necessity.
Right.
And how to accomplish the job.
Absolutely.
So just as a last point then, are there mitigating steps that would allow Republicans and conservatives to feel more comfortable about a remote session? I mean, these are unprecedented times. We're not going to get into the COVID debate.
Right.
But a huge portion of the state believes these are unprecedented times. How do you mitigate that?
Well, it's all about approach and how this session was conceived and thought of. This entire pandemic has been approached in an upside-down fashion. It's always gone full tilt to that we shut everything down, punish everyone equally, and then we'll pick winners and losers out of that mess. And the legislative session is exactly the same way. We're going to shut the entire thing down. We're going to exclude the public. We're going to allow a little bit of press, but only the ones that we like. And we're going to be completely controlling from the top down. What we need to have happen is, instead of everyone's excluded except for the handful that run the show, that are the puppet masters, it needs to be everyone's included. And then if you find yourself unable to attend because you're too old or because you have an immunity deficiency, or if there's a serious risk that needs to be mitigated for itself, then you separate yourself. We find ways to include you from afar rather than affecting the whole. And that's the what we want to see is an approach that says we treat individuals as individuals, and if you've got a risk, then you figure out how to separate and isolate yourself in that situation.
So that's a very good close. And I would just say to Speaker Lori Jenkins, hear it and think about taking action. And just a little bit of personal advice to Brandon Block. Get a new hairdo and think about whether or not you want to be an objective journalist that can be taken sincerely or an advocacy journalist. It's up to you. Thank you, Tyler, for being here. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it very much, Johnny. Thank you.
Next up, we've got the man. Was he separated at birth from Tim Eyman? Taught Jesse Waters everything he knows, or is he just a humble activist with a great sense of humor? Up next, and you'll decide. You tell me. Hello again, and on our last segment of the first episode of Patriot Live, I'm just really pleased to introduce my good friend, activist from We the Governed, and many, many other accomplishments and groups he's belonged to in the past years. Glenn Morgan, thanks for being here, Glenn.
Johnny, as always, thank you so much for having me here, and thanks for putting on this event. And I'm looking forward to seeing you do more and more of these.
Well, our audience will let us know. I probably am going to might as well just do it preemptively, right? If I offended anybody who doesn't have hair out there in the audience, I apologize. It's just easy for me to do that. I'm envious, okay? So whatever that guy's name was, that's the advocacy journalist, I envy your hair. So we should be good now. Glenn, you have always supported the Kitsap Patriots Tea Party, now the Puget Sound Patriots, for a long time. And I just want to reminisce a moment. You've helped us with the Olympic Conference for a few years.
Yeah.
And we're Activist of the Year. That meant
My honor.
something. I could see something. Do you remember that moment?
I do. I was very honored to receive that award. Yeah.
And we're on tap to help us give this year's, and then we were kind of shut down by technical difficulties.
And 2020 and all the joy that it's brought us.
All the joy, all the joy.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to catch up with that again in June, I hope.
I hope so.
And we'll do 2 years in a row. So what are your thoughts, real quick? It's not the main topic, but of the remote management of the legislature.
Well, I know with both Representative Young here earlier and Tyler speaking earlier about the problems with it, I agree. I mean, this remote session is a horrible approach, and is really designed, I think, to deny access to the legislature. And one of the things that I think people are also overlooking is the fact that convenient technical glitches can and probably will occur to ensure that those who are saying something that doesn't conform with Governor Inslee's objectives or goals will suddenly find that they won't be able to testify, or that their testimony will be cut off. I mean, I've experienced that even in times when I've had TVW cut my testimony and censor it out. So imagine now that they have the ability to just easily pick and choose. And if you've sat there in testimony and you've watched these remote sessions that they have done remote testimony before, you'll notice that oftentimes the remote testimony is far less impactful to the legislators or the senators in either committee or any other setting that I've seen it actually occur. It's better than nothing, but it's not as good as being there in front of them and being able to kind of read how they're relating or responding to what you testify in. And I think, just to reemphasize what Representative Young said earlier, is that Governor Inslee and his supporters from Seattle really want us to believe that we're only 2 to 3 and maybe 4 tax hikes away from utopia if we just pass another one. But like any other situation, those tax hikes are primarily going to be used to harm us, and whatever utopian schemes or goals that they have will conveniently fail, just like they've always failed so far. And the one thing that we find is the more utopian an area gets for a collectivist, whether that's downtown Olympia, whether that's downtown Seattle, it's always interesting to see how many people want to flee those areas. The more utopian and collectivist they seem to get, the higher the tax rate seems to get. It's interesting that people are always fleeing. And I won't say everybody. If you look at these cities, you can see there's a lot of drug addicts that are coming into the cities and filling up tents on the sidewalks and in the parks and the green spaces and dumping garbage everywhere and throwing needles in the park. But that's probably not the utopia that has been promised to most of us. And if you live in these areas, that's probably not what you want to see your city become, unless you're a drug dealer or a grant grifter who happens to be making a lot of money off of making sure the problem never goes away.
So Governor Inslee, by all objective, I just wrote down a quick scorecard of what came to my mind first.
Okay, yeah.
Failed at mental health, right? Failed in the prisons,
Yep.
big controversies there. Failed with homelessness, it's increasing, it's not decreasing. And he failed on the economy, people out of work, businesses going out every day. And he's failed on eliminating the COVID virus. What has he succeeded at?
Well, and I'm going to add to that, because there's one thing that you missed that's actually quite important. In the middle of this lockdown, there's this implied belief that there's a government safety net that exists for people who are unemployed, particularly lowest income people. And so they basically can get on unemployment. And more significantly, Governor Inslee, at his direction and impressive leadership, has been able to appoint one of the most incompetent people that we've assigned to a state agency recently, which is one of his biggest campaign bundlers, Susie Levine, to run the Employment Security Department. And under her stellar watch and high skill set, they've been able to lose close to $600 million, as far as we can tell, and send it over to an overseas Nigerian fraud scheme, which has helped ensure that thousands, tens of thousands of Washingtonians who are unemployed don't get a dime. And they've been unable to get actually their unemployment right in the middle of probably the biggest crisis, where the government is mandating all these businesses and jobs are just wiped out for some period of time. Supposedly the government exists there to help people in that time. And that is the fundamental failure that I think that Governor Inslee has committed under his watch, that's directly responsible to the executive. He can't control the fact that COVID's out there, but he can't control the actions that he takes to mitigate it. And instead of mitigating it, he's actually found almost every way to make it worse. So the impact is far worse in the state. And that's really a big problem.
Well, how long can the curve remain flat?
Right. Yeah, I know. And well, the other thing is, if you're allowed to go into Costco, but you can't go into Spiffy's restaurant, and supposedly the COVID's decided that it doesn't spread at Costco, but it will somehow mysteriously spread at Spiffy's. Now, of course, we know that that's not true, because in Yakima recently, the Yakima Costco had 145 people test positive for COVID, despite the fact that everybody there wears masks. You can't get in the door without a mask. Every employee there has worn masks, and they've done that for 9 months now. And yet somehow that place has just had one of the biggest known super spreader COVID events in the state. So, we're finding that this response and approach to how they manage, of course, that's just assuming that the tests are accurate, and it assumes that, the way they're presenting this is unlike any other disease, they're emphasizing the fact that people catch it, and a lot of people think that's how many people are actually dying from it, or they there's a lot of confusion in statistics, not just among the elected officials who usually math is a sore and difficult subject for them anyway, but also among the general public in the way it's presented here, because obviously not that many people are going to die from it. It's a very small percentage. But this, I just can't imagine that it might be possible to do a worse job than what Governor Inslee's doing, but it's really tough. So.
Well, we'll get on to something even more fun.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand, and we're just going to talk Washington State here.
Yep, sure.
Not national. But how is it even possible that voter integrity is a partisan issue?
Well, and that's a great question, because voter integrity shouldn't be partisan at all. And it shouldn't be something that if you're a Democrat, you believe that vote fraud doesn't exist, and if you're a Republican, you believe everything's fraudulent. It should be something that both groups, whichever party you belong in, and really irrespective of whatever party you're in, you should believe that the integrity of the voting system is actually critical and important. But really, the problem in Washington State goes back quite a ways, and it really goes back to the 2004 election with the governor's race with Dino Rossi and Christine Gregoire, and the race came down, and Dino Rossi won. And then in King County Elections Department back then, which has been nicknamed the Fraud Factory by many people around Washington State, they kept mysteriously finding secret stashes of ballots in the trunk of cars of employees and all kinds of things until they recounted until Governor Gregoire got just a little bit, just 100 and some odd votes over, and then suddenly the victory is declared. Now, ever since then, Washington State has had a lot of concerns. The conservatives and Republicans in Washington State have had a lot of concerns about the voter integrity of Washington. And what we had recently occur in Washington State, most of the controversy has been around the country dealing with mail-in voter ballots. That's been the biggest concern. And we've had mail-in voter ballots now as the dominant, exclusive way of voting since 2011, but it's been the dominant way of voting since a little after 2000. And so it's been really the dominant way most people in Washington have voted. And recently, after the recent elections, I know I've been involved and will continue to be involved in doing some work in dealing with some of the voter integrity problems that we have in this state, and we really have quite a few. And I would say that when you look at the problems that we've had in Washington, most of it has been around the voting rolls, at least the stuff that I think I can prove. And this is according, not because Glenn Morgan made this up, but because the U.S. Post Office has indicated. Now, granted, the U.S. Post Office is a government agency. Like all government agencies, incompetence is the dominant existence of their life, and it's pretty much the way they operate all the time. But even as incompetent as they are, assuming that there's some level of relevance to what they tell us, there's about 130,000 people that have moved over a year before they voted, and with no forwarding address and no way to get the ballots to them, yet somehow they voted, just in this last election cycle. On top of that, you have another 40,000 people who, according again to the post office, again, not the most competent group of people in the world, but according to them, those addresses don't exist at all. And in fact, those are fake addresses, and there is no person that exists there. Now, I don't know completely how accurate this is. And the only way we're going to know is doing the same thing that they're doing in Arizona, which is sending out activists door to door, every single one of these voters. And yes, if you were one of these fake voters, we may not be able to find your address, but we'll see if we can. And if you moved over a year ago, we'd like to know who's filling out your ballot or how you somehow got it, if you actually did. If you did, that's great. Then you're probably a legal voter, because in Washington State, the rules are pretty odd. And it seems like you can just say that you live on a baseball field somewhere, and that's going to be your home and voting address from now on, and that's another problem. But we're really uncovering a lot of problems. Voting dead. Is there more to life after death than just voting? And that's a great question, but for 10,695 people, it appeared to be that voting was a pretty high priority for them, even though they died before the election. So I'd like to know exactly what happened in those cases. And for those who have moved out of state, who seem to be registered to vote in 2 or more states, exactly how many states can you simultaneously vote in? Sure, that's a fraud, but it is illegal. Both federal law and state law, that's technically illegal, but we certainly don't seem to want to be uncovering it here. And so these are the things that I think we're looking into.
Well, isn't it true that the Democratic Party in Washington has occasionally just denied that it occurs at all?
Sure, and I think that's reflexive, because if your elected officials, if those people get elected, they don't want to say, hey, I got elected, but there's a lot of problems with the voting system. Nobody ever wants to say that, because they kind of imply that somehow they got elected through an illegitimate means, right? So nobody's ever going to say that.
And so with the Democrats in charge for so long, it's not likely to hear an alternative?
No, they're never gonna. They're gonna pretend that fraud doesn't exist, and we can easily prove that fraud exists. I don't know if that's even still the argument anymore, because I think even most Democrats would say, hey, there's some fraud. The question is how much fraud, and whether that fraud is statistically significant enough to change the outcome of an election. And the truth is, based on these overall numbers, we don't know for sure yet, but we can say that probably some elections, certainly close elections, probably could have been affected by fraud. We know the 2004 example, where Kristen Gregoire, almost assuredly, that was a fraudulent sort of operation to get her over the top. But the question is, how many did that happen to in this last election? I can't honestly say, and I don't think we're going to know until we've really done a much more thorough job of digging into the data. We're only going to get that by going door to door, just like they're doing in Arizona. And just like they're finding in Arizona, we're finding lots of issues with the voting rolls, the way they exist in Washington State.
We're not really the epicenter
We are.
of what's going on in the country in terms of fraud.
Right.
But I know you haven't finished your research yet.
Mhm.
Is there any area in the state that you can lean toward as being particularly vulnerable?
Well, King County is particularly vulnerable. And King County mainly from a lack of accountability standpoint, and this is both a Republican and a Democrat problem. The Republicans largely have a hands-off approach to King County, and that's a big mistake because there's 300, depending on how you look at it, it's about 350,000 Republican voters in King County, but there's a lot more Democrat voters there. There's about twice that many Democrat voters there in that county. And because Democrats have generally done well in King County and for the most part control all levers of power there, the Republicans have sort of been apathetic and not really paying attention to what's going on. And anytime you have centralized groupthink like that, where it's all one group controlling every aspect of it, you go back to the question is who counts the votes. And you got one building in King County that basically houses 30% of all votes that get cast in Washington State, and nobody pays attention to what happens there after hours. Nobody's paying attention to what's where those ballots. Nobody really does any auditing of any significant level there, and so that's going to be the most obvious place you want to look. Voting, it's not a real magic formula. It's going to be based on the large population centers that you want to pay attention to.
Is there any likelihood that there could be any legislative focus on voter integrity this year?
I don't know, and that's a very good question. I think the Republicans do want to have improved voter integrity. I think the Democrats believe they benefit from the current system, so whether there's any integrity there or not, they don't really care. It's a quest for power more than it is about integrity. And that's going to probably be the dynamic fight. I have to admit that when there were a couple things that the legislature changed, and to the Republicans' credit, they've actually all voted against it, and the Democrats all voted in favor of it. And I remember when this was going on in Olympia, and several people, we were trying to get in to testify, actually. I just didn't have time to go in and testify against it, but I talked to Jan Heimbach, who actually did testify against it. And one of her concerns was this same-day voter registration, for example, which is where we've run into some problems with the voter database and fraud as far as people suddenly being able to register the day of instead of 30 days in advance, which is what it had been before. And so that's introduced a whole host of other problems. And a lot of this is wonkish, but it should be very transparent and should be universal. People should have a universal acceptance that what we want is honest and auditable and transparent election processes. There were a lot of Democrats, a lot of my friends on the other side who were concerned when Trump got elected in 2016 that there was some kind of fraud that allowed him to get in. And in fact, they've challenged both the times that George Bush was elected and when Trump was elected over the last 20 years. So questioning the fact that they're willing to question it then and now suddenly aren't willing to question it should really help raise red flags. We should be looking into this. We shouldn't be the laughingstock of the industrialized world where we're the only ones who can't seem to run an election without obvious problems.
We've only got a few minutes left, but you have a plethora of projects that you're going to try to get to this year.
Yeah.
Give us a hint on what's in store.
Well, I have, since it looks like we're going into this weird, I agree that it's unconstitutional, the approach that they're going to have the legislature. I plan on doing a lot of emphasis of showing what's going on as best I can and trying to help educate people about the legislative session, the secret hidden legislative session where you won't have access to it. And we'll call it the Zoom legislature, I guess, this year. I've also had a project that I'm going to launch this year, which is basically weirdos and heroes in local government. I've featured a lot of elected officials in the past, and there's some real clowns that we've elected in office around the state, and sometimes it's just worth going in and showing just how clownish and ridiculous these people are. But at the same time, and that's kind of a negative thing, it may be funny, but in the city of Olympia and Seattle and Burien and places like this give us a lot to work with. But at the same time, there are really good people that are elected to local office that stand up and do the right thing, and I think oftentimes don't get the credit for it. So the Weirdos and Heroes series, I kind of expect that to be to get a lot of attention, and I'm also planning to go around and show the true face of liberal utopianism with all the great needle camps and drug problems all over the state, and the modern tent camps that we're basically funding all around the state, and really this concentrated effort to see how much pollution we can shove into our green spaces in the urban areas, and you're paying for it. Your taxpayer dollars are paying for it. So I think it's really worth going in and talking about this utopia and seeing if that's actually the utopia that the people voted for when they put those goofballs in charge.
So how do people contact you and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, my website's wethegovern.com, and I have a YouTube channel that I've been doing a lot more video work lately. That's also We the Governed, and you should be able to find it in both places until Google decides to take away my YouTube channel. I'm sure they'll censor me eventually. But until then, at least that's a way to find out. I'm also on Facebook for now, again, until they decide to take it away under We the Governed. And feel free to look at either of those, any of those options. I do anticipate that I'll be set up on a lot of the more free speech-oriented platforms pretty soon as well. But I'm going to stay with the traditional platforms until they finally do totally censor me.
One last thing.
Yep.
I'm going to go off script just a little bit off my outline, but big tech. I read the other day that Poland, of all places, has managed to outlaw big tech that censors speech that is not criminally offensive. That seems like a pretty simple and elegant solution.
Sure.
What do you think?
I think censorship's a big problem, and I mean, the libertarian approach and has been all these are private businesses, but the reality is they've started to become operating like utilities, and we've given them special treatment and special support for a long time, whether that's Google or Facebook or any of these other big social media platforms, and they've decided to abuse the platform that they've had, that they officially started out with as a free speech platform, an opportunity for the people to share your thoughts. And they've chosen now to clearly turn them into just propaganda machines. And censorship is a nasty and bad road to be traveling down. Once you travel down that censorship road, the outcome is never going to be good, no matter how smart and brilliant that you think you are. And it's censoring ideas that you don't like. It's not a way for good ideas to prevail. It's just a way to ensure that your ideas get weaker and weaker as time goes by because you can't challenge or even know why you believe it. And we've seen this happen on college campuses, and that idea now has shifted. And so when the big tech becomes just like Evergreen State College, then you know we're going to be in trouble. And I think that there's just no good outcome down the road.
Isn't that really the specter of corporatocracy, where large influential corporations collaborate with the government to impose their will over everyday folks like you and I?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what it is. Big companies have worked together hand in glove with the government on this censorship approach. I think to think otherwise is just kind of delusional and isn't paying attention to it, what's actually going on out there. And when that happens, the people lose. And when special interests can control that message so dominantly and in coordination with government ensure that only one message gets across, you can't even question authority. The idea of questioning authority, particularly for those who think that they're politically in power, has just become anathema to them. They don't even want to say it. The idea of questioning authority should be illegal. We're going to censor you. We're going to prevent you from saying that. That's a bad thing, and it is a bad thing for a free society or a healthy society. That's not what we want to see, and I'm hoping that we can make some progress. But unfortunately, just like everybody wants to escape Seattle or escape Olympia and get away from the disaster that there is unfolding there, people are trying to escape these platforms and create new ones, and perhaps that's going to be one of the solutions too.
Well, you've been a great supporter of the Patriots for years, a good friend of mine. Thank you for being here at our first show.
Johnny, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I promised you, ladies and gentlemen, that, I've just offended a whole bunch of different verbs. What do they call those? But for those of you who are listening and are the resistance, I just want you to know that there's a way you can support our efforts. We're going to put up a contact slide, and if you believe in our cause, the cause of truth, of fighting for liberty and individual rights, there's a path for you to donate to continue these episodes. I also want to wish you well. Be safe as your conscience desires, and look forward to seeing you again on Patriot Law. Thank you.